Seattle to Newark, 4.5 hours, 8.5 hours to Warsaw, and 1.25 hours from Warsaw to Lviv. We arrive at the Lviv airport on Sunday afternoon after having left Seattle on Saturday, and clear the airport. Our guide, Alex Denai, picks us up at the airport, and we go and check into our hotel and do a walkabout tour of the central district of Lviv. This is in the old medieval Jewish ghetto area, established somewhere in the late 1500s, and we're in the area where the original entrance and gate to the medieval ghetto was. And then in the late 1500s, in 1595, this is the remnants of a synagogue that was destroyed by the Germans during World War II, and that was designed and built by an Italian architect, and it is still there as a tourist attraction in central Lviv and commemorated by this plaque. As you walk through this old medieval Jewish district, you can see some old Jewish houses where the place for the mezuzah is still there. And then this again is where the main gate to the old medieval ghetto was. And then serendipitous surprise, as we were touring the older area, these women in traditional costume were walking toward us and toward one of the churches. And then the black building in the picture used to be a private residence and is now a historical museum. This is one of the older buildings that's been restored into a bank. This gentrification is going on in the central part of Lviv, and people are privatizing. And all of these buildings have 3 windows wide, because once upon a time, taxes were done by the number of windows. So to keep the taxes down, people would build the building deep and only 3 windows wide. This is a statue of the Good Soldier's Wife in front of a restaurant, and people have their pictures taken there. It's Sunday night in Kivichenko Square in front of our hotel, and the people have gathered to sing patriotic songs right near the Kivichenko Monument. This is the next morning at the square. Of course, it's kind of empty, and Michael and I are waiting for Alex to meet us and do a little more touring. This is the Grand Hotel, where we spent our one night in Lviv. And as we were walking from here to the Opera House, we ran into this gentleman doing street performing on the bandura, a very old Ukrainian instrument. This is the Opera House, built in the very late 19th century. And then we went over to the old Jewish commercial district, where there is renovation and restoration going on. And you can still see from probably the 1930s Yiddish, Polish, and Russian on the street signs where the merchants were. This used to be the old Jewish theater in Lviv. Lviv had at one time, in 1941, about 120,000 Jews out of a population of 260,000. This is the University of Lviv, where our guide got his degree in history and was once upon a time used for other purposes. This building is one of the ones that is being restored, and Shalom Aleichem once lived in this building for 2 or 3 years. Then not far from there, there was the modern Jewish district of Lviv, where many of the Jews lived. And in the early 1990s, after the Ukraine became a country, some people gathered and created a monument to the Holocaust at the general entrance to this old Jewish neighborhood that was in Lviv. And that statue of grief is very impressive. Then we went on to Genowaska, which was a killing field in 1942. It is now a dog attack training facility for the police in the Ukrainian state. There were 200,000 Jews killed on this site, and this memorial is a commemoration to those 200,000 Jews. This is one of the older railroad stations from which approximately 500,000 Jews were shipped to the various concentration camps, such as Sobibor and Treblinka. Then later in the day, after lunch at the Dunais, we went to Ternopil, which is about 80 miles from Lviv. We stayed in the Galician Hotel in Ternopil. The accommodations were quite nice. This is the central square in Ternopil. Ternopil is about 160,000 people now. Was virtually completely destroyed in World War II, and 90% of the buildings in the town are built after 1946. It was kind of fascinating to see their opera house playing Cyrano de Bergerac. Then we left Ternopil the next morning on our way to Lanovtsy. It's approximately 35 miles from Ternopil to Lanovtsy, rolling countryside. Much of it they grow sugar beets in. And shortly we arrive in Lanovtsy, and it's June 1st. We're signed to the entrance to the town with Son Michael, and some of the things that we see right away was the car going by in front of it. And this is the old map drawn in 1969 by Lanovtsy survivors. And this is a picture that my aunt brought with her from Lanovtsy about 1930. And we're standing in the same spot that the picture was taken in, and looking at this same street, which is now paved. And this is the house next door to my grandfather's house. The lower level is a shoemaker's, and it was a beer and wine tavern back in 1941. That's where my grandfather's house stood. Somewhere between 1964 and 1968, it was changed to this stucco 2 flat when it was originally a story-and-a-half frame house. Across the street is this Soviet-era apartment building where my grandfather's blacksmith shop once stood. This building is right around the corner, and there are some Lanovtsy people living in the Seattle area. And one of them, she and her father used to work at that photo store. This is typical of what you see in many of the villages in the western Ukraine. Once upon a time, one of the 3 synagogue buildings was located where this modern supermarket is.